Hey there and welcome back to another Rise of the Guardians video. And recently, I've been making a lot of videos relating to the Rise of the Guardians franchise. First discussing why, despite the film being one of the best DreamWorks films ever, it will not be getting any sort of follow-up or sequel, and then another to really just hone in on what a truly awful person the Man in the Moon is. Like seriously, just think of all the awful things that happened to Jack Frost and the Guardians in the film alone, and just let the hatred of the stupid Moon Man flow through you. But today, I think I want to take a little bit of a different tack and talk about the untapped backstory of one of the most important characters in the entire film, the primary antagonist, Pitch Black. Now, before I go any further with this, I do really need to stress that I love this film with an undying passion. It's such a good movie, and it is devastating that we will likely never get any sort of follow-up in this cinematic universe due to the commercial failure of the first film. After all, there really is just so much to love about it. But there was always one thing that let the film down from a narrative perspective, and that is the character of Pitch Black, aka the Boogeyman. To me, Pitch Black always felt like a very vanilla villain, very generic, without much purpose. He enters the story, is pale and creepy looking with black clothes, and his only real motivation is to be spooky and make children stop believing so that he can have an evil planet. Like, yeah, I know that animated films often have pretty stock standard villains because they prefer to emphasize the hero, but I just can't help but feel like the character was let down by his storyline. I mean, next to Jack, I think that he should have been the character that deserves the most growth and the most story, that deserves to have a properly fleshed out arc. But he doesn't. Hell, he has one of the lesser arcs in the film. A pretty basic and at sometimes boring storyline, at least compared to what could have been. We first see him in the early stages of the film, where he does some creepy evil laughing and then monologues about how he's going to corrupt the dreams of children before usurping a bunch of Sandman sand and creating his nightmares. He steals a bunch of teeth from the Tooth Fairy Palace, and then, after a couple of evil monologues that don't really explain anything beyond "I'm evil because I'm evil, ha 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 ha," he kills Sandy to make the audience care. And they do, because Sandy's a little cutie. Anyway, he keeps sending his nightmares around the world and keeps beating down the Guardians until they finally, eventually, defeat him using the power of belief, and he gets sucked into a dark hole, I guess, under a bed. Well, who cares, because he's banished. Goodbye, the end. And yeah, at first this was actually fine for me. Fine for me for years, I didn't particularly mind. After all, I don't really expect every film to have villains that have a whole lot of depth, or backstory, or even motive. The fact that he was evil, simply for the sake of being evil, didn't particularly matter to me. And for many years, that was the status quo that it maintained in my mind. I was simply happy the film existed, and that the heroes seemed to have a bit of depth to them, particularly Jack Frost. I was vaguely aware there was an original book series that the film was based off of, but I didn't pay it much mind. After all, I thought to myself, it's a kid's book. Idiot. But after that, I forgot all about the books. Until recently, when I was talking about how it's such a shame that the Rise of the Guardians film hasn't had any sequel films, or TV series, or anything like that, because it seems like such a rich and interesting idea. And that got me thinking about the books again. And I did end up taking a look, and I ended up getting mighty surprised by what I saw, because it turns out that Pitch Black has a really rich and interesting backstory that was not tapped at all. And on top of that, it turns out this whole world is so much more insane than I originally thought. An interplanetary civilization in the stars? Hell yeah, sign me up. Why didn't we get this as our movie? Anyway, let's try to stay on topic. So I realize that many of you might not have read the books. So I will give you a quick summary of what I've learned about Pitch's backstory. He existed during a time called the Golden Age, an era where travel between planets was possible and whole constellations were ruled over by kind and benevolent families. But of course, peace was not completely secure, because worlds were often threatened by the dark forces of feelings, nightmare men, and dream pirates, and so heroes had to rise up to take the fight to them and protect the cosmos. And one such hero, of course, is Pitch Black, who at the time went by the stupid name Cosmotus Pitchina. A hero who lived on a moon in the constellation of Orion with his wife and daughter. Now this dude was a verified Chad, who spent his days whooping evil ass to the point that the villains decided they had to try and break his spirit by murdering his family. Classic villain tactic. Anyway, his wife ends up dying, and he thinks his daughter dies too. So he goes on a mega crusade against the villains and starts sealing them inside a prison planet, and then volunteers to guard it forever. After all, he thinks, what else do I have left? In typical evil villain fashion though, the forces of evil work to try and seduce him to the dark side. eventually going so far as to mimic his daughter's voice so he will think she is trapped in the prison. Obviously, the dude loves his daughter, so he opens it up and gets swarmed by the full power of the feelings, which transforms him into Pitch Black, the Nightmare King. And already, here we go, it's a very interesting and intriguing backstory that could have been drawn from, but wasn't. Yes, I know it hadn't all been written yet, but surely there was some idea of all this. After all, it's William Joyce's brainchild. Couldn't he have helped them out? Did they just ignore him, or did he just not make this? Anyway, back to the backstory. After being transformed by the forces of evil, it's safe to say he goes insane and decides that he wants to bring an end to the Golden Age and goes about conquering planets and snuffing out stars, stealing dreams and leaving nightmares behind. So pretty much what he's trying to do in the film, but with a bit more success. And with explained motives and reasons behind his actions. Hell, he even genocides the Easter Bunny's planet, leaving him as the last of his kind. Guess that was not something they were interested in referencing in the film at all? Or that he slaughtered the Man in the Moon's parents and battled with Nightlight, who would eventually go on to become Jack Frost. But once again, none of this is ever made reference to. They kind of just breeze past everything and imply that Pitch is some random evil man and that the Guardians are just magic people who have always lived on Earth. And to me, it feels kind of wasteful to have had access to such a deep and rich world and not use it all, or really hardly use any of it apart from the characters. No backstory, no history, no motives, just nothing. And I know that not all the books had been written at this stage of the game, but I doubt William Joyce was flying by the seat of his pants writing these things. I feel like he had to have had some sort of backstory written out, even if the books hadn't been properly written. So I can't help but feel like this was a bit of self-sabotage. And I don't know who to blame. Was it the original writer's fault? DreamWorks, the director, the screenwriter? Who knows? I know they didn't want the books and the film to overlap too much so that people would be still interested in reading/watching both of them, but I still can't help but feel that if you have access to a unique and interesting concept, you should just use it. Pitch Black had the potential to be so much more than what we got on screen, and it's a shame. And yeah, it probably wouldn't have impacted the box office all that much, and thus we still wouldn't get any sequels or continuations, but I still think it would have made the film better overall, and so it's still a little bit disappointing to see. But anyway, with that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about all this? Think they could have worked harder to integrate some of the original source material into the film? Would it have made a difference? Or do you just like it how it is now? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.